Hi, thanks for joining. This is Craig Lancaster and Peter Marlton, and they're going to talk to you about trading places when literary fiction takes you somewhere else. You guys can take it away.
Well, hey, Pete. Hey, thanks, Elizabeth. So Pete, I was really excited to talk about this topic with you, because in our pregame
Right.
discussion, it was pretty obvious that place is the beating heart underneath the prose, and so I'm curious, with your book Eternal Graffiti, A, what is the place, and B, how does that inform what you wrote?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. And Elizabeth, thanks for putting this together. It's really great to be here. Well, place is, chronologically, each place in the book is really crucial, and it goes from Venice Beach to New York to Ireland, and then it goes to sort of Indonesia and India, and each place has a certain mood and a certain sort of tone to it. To begin with, Venice Beach, it's Venice Beach in the early 70s, and it's really bohemian, and there's a lot of crazy stuff going on there. But I think the place is crucial in terms of where the character's at, because it's, place and character are not separate, they're interchanged. And like you think about Raymond Chandler. Raymond Chandler's stories couldn't take place anywhere but LA, that kind of thing. So all those places are important in terms of mood and the progress of the characters, and it's also a state of mind as well, like each place has a different vibe to it or whatever. Like when you go from Venice Beach, it's all beach and hanging out and smoking marijuana and getting high, and and then you're going to New York City where it's more intense. So yeah, what about you?
Well, so I have a prop, actually, my book, and It Will Be a Beautiful Life. It just, it's got the formal wear now because it's won a couple of awards, which has been nice.
Congratulations, man.
Yeah, thanks. So my stories are largely set in Montana, where I live, but it's not where I'm from. And what I found about writing Montana, because that's what I've always been compelled to do, is that I approach it a little bit from an outsider's standpoint. And so, for instance, my lead character in And It Will Be a Beautiful Life is Montana born and bred, but he is a traveling pipeline inspector, and so he's never home. And so that's where the outsider aspect comes in. I can write about him being detached from the place that he is, because I'm a little detached from it. I grew up somewhere else. So even though I've lived here for, the better part of 15 years,
Where'd you grow up?
Texas. Yeah. So, which is a whole other thing,
in terms of like state of mind, for example, I think you would have, like, if you were a character, you would have a much different take on Montana coming from Texas than you would, say, from LA,
Right. But the irony, I suppose, is that I'm so far gone from Texas that Montana is more home to me. Like I would find it nearly impossible to write about contemporary Texas because I don't really know it. But I do know contemporary Montana from from approaching it just a little bit from the outside. And so in thinking about this topic, I realized, gosh, just about every character I have is it stands a little bit outside of where he's from. And I'm certain that that's reflected in, the way I come at place.
Yeah. It's interesting. Probably the most profound experience for me in terms of place as a writer, for anything I've ever done, is this character Kira, who's basically the heart and soul of the story. Kira is the love of Owen, the protagonist's life, and she arrived out of nowhere. I mean, he's walking down the boardwalk and he hears this voice. I didn't know who it was, and then she developed into this character, and she's from Ireland. And I realized as I was writing it, I had to go to Ireland.
Oh wow, yeah.
And I mean, I was compelled to go to Ireland, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to really write where she's from, and where she was from is so important. So it was really fascinating, because I was writing that she was in Kilkenny, and I went with my daughter, and we got to Kilkenny, and it just wasn't right. I had already written the house, and where this huge tree, there's a scene of this huge tree, and I was telling my daughter, like, this isn't it. We're just going to have to drive until we find it. And we literally drove around Ireland trying to find where Kira was from.
Right.
And we found it. And it was like this, like, resonating thing in my heart or whatever, in my mind as well. Like, oh, this is it. And the thing is, finding that transformed the whole story.
Sure.
I mean, there are these scenes that happen a little bit further away from where she lived. And so, I mean, there's no greater way I could emphasize for myself how important place was, because if I hadn't gone there,
right,
so much happens in Ireland. If I hadn't gone there, it wouldn't have worked. It would have been sort of like a shoestring thing that is patched together, and so unfortunately, so what I've tried to do is, like, I don't want to write a story that happens in South Africa, because I can't afford it,
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's fascinating. The modern tools like Google Earth and stuff that can get you somewhere if you're writing about something unknown to you, but that's not gonna give you that on the ground thump that you're talking about, where you saw it and you knew this is where she's from. You're just not going to get that. Yeah,
it just wasn't going to happen. And yeah, because on the other hand, you think about, like, I was thinking about Lord of the Rings,
right,
where all these places are imaginary, and there's many examples of that, and I think that's just as fascinating in the way that you can, I don't think I could do it, but people can create very realistic places in ways that just are amazing. And so that sort of, for me, I think, I mean, I don't know, I would love to talk to Tolkien, but I think it's too late.
Yeah. But, he's unavailable. Yeah.
He's unavailable. But it's like, I imagine he was going from mood and tone first, and creating the place out of that, rather than having the place create the mood of the tone. I don't know, but
the longer I do this, the more I think fiction is, particularly literary fiction. You're either coming at it with memory that you're then trying to apply some imagination to create this other story, or you're coming at it from finely honed observation that you're then trying to apply some imagination to it. But imagination is one of the key ingredients, and I think on some, like, world building, like the Lord of the Rings that you're talking about, the toggle switch on imagination is off the charts.
Right.
Where for literary fiction, certain kinds of literary fiction, perhaps, the imagination part is a little more gentle, and it's applied to existing memory or observation.
Yeah. Like for me with Venice, and by the way, I'm in Paris. I was planning on bringing several copies of the book here, and I forgot them, so I don't have my. But anyway, for Venice, I lived down there a long time ago, and then I went back for 10 days, and it was kind of exactly what you're saying. Like, there's a store called, it's a surfboard store called Shark Attack, which isn't there, but when I was there, I could play. I knew exactly where it would have been, and where Kira's house was, and this other character Greta, I knew exactly where they were, and that came out of being there, but it was also sort of imposing, like you said, I think you put it really well, this sort of more gentle, imaginary, place along there. I don't know if I made sense on that.
No, it makes total sense. I mean, one of the things I think so interesting about where you center a story, where you place it, is, we've all heard the adage about writing a novel is a series of choices, that you make as you go through it. Well, place imposes a lot of those choices on the thing. There's going to be a social or political sensibility. There's going to be, time and place will apply what people are worried about, what they're fearful of. The fears of the late 1970s are very different from the fears of the early aughts or whatever.
Right.
And that's one of the things I like best, because once I've made that decision, like we're doing this story here, or in your case, the many here's of that story, you're then thrust into, okay, I got to capture the flavor of the time and the place and the people, and that's, to me, it's one of the most fun things about doing this.
How did you start writing about Montana? How did that begin?
Yeah, it was very strange. The first book I ever wrote was just, I set it in Montana almost out of expediency sake, because it's where I lived, Montana, it has this very rich literary heritage. I mean, it's a large state in terms of geographic size. It's a small state in terms of population, and yet in just about any Montana town, if you throw a rock, you're going to bean a writer,
Really?
Oh yeah. And so consequently, the place churns out a lot of, sort of hard earth stories, guy gazing across the grandeur of the landscape, and, all that implies, and the struggle and all of that. And I love reading those books, but I'm not, I'm a kid from the suburb who grew up in the 80s, and so it just Montana doesn't speak to me in that same way. So I've ended up kind of carving out this niche where it's like, no, I mean, I'm the guy who writes a book where a pizza gets delivered in Montana.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, it's not the central element, that'd be pretty boring, but it's the way people in my books tend to live. They tend to be a little more urban. They tend to be maybe a little bit younger. I'm not writing about, homesteading days and stuff like that. So,
yeah, that's great. I think it's good. Especially the expediency. If you're there and it's like, oh, I'll write about this, I don't have to make up a place or something like that.
Yeah, I found that, I mean, my entry into a writing career was, don't have a lot of buildup, just start doing it, and I've honed as I go, as opposed to storing up a whole lifetime's worth of experiences so I could write my magnum opus and be done with it. So.
I mean, I respect someone who does that, but I think in terms of writing, I think you just have to write and deal with the endless rejections and the heartache. And, I went through this period where you see the movie Amadeus?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So there's Mozart and there's Salieri, and Salieri's jealous of Mozart, and he shakes his fist at God like, you gave me the desire but not the talent. That's how I felt.
Yeah.
I went through that for 2 or 3 years. I was just like, what am I, because I couldn't not do it, but it was very much of a struggle. And then one day I had these two and this is maybe place because it's state of mind. And I
Sure.
had these two, and I could actually write about this, but the normal brain and then the whiny brain,
Yeah.
you know,
Okay.
and the whiny brain was like, I can't write, and you didn't give me the talent, and you know why, poor, pitiful me, you know. And then there's one day this actually happened, where the other part of my brain got so fed up with this part of my brain that it was an epiphany for me. It
Right.
said, look, can you ever imagine yourself not writing? And the little whiny part says, no.
Yeah.
And this part said, well, then shut up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, after that, actually things started picking up and stuff. But I think the compulsion, I think there is a compulsion, maybe not for everyone, but I think if you're saving up all your jewels and treasures for one big book, it's probably not going to happen, you know,
Yeah.
because it takes a long time, or at least for me, a very long time to develop the craft and the trust in yourself, and you know, and so, like, again, going back to our theme here today, it's like I think, at least for me, I've actually finally learned to trust myself. Like, I wrote a story, and these things, I don't know where they come from, and that's one of the great delights of writing for me, is I don't know where they come from.
Right.
I sit down to write. I sat down to write this. I'm working on this next book, and I wrote this scene last night. I had no idea how did that happen? But
Barbara Thoreau, one of the great Montana booksellers. So glad to see you here. Yeah, I do think that you can expand the notion of place to mindset.
yeah,
I think you absolutely can do that.
Jonathan Papernick, author of I Am My Beloved's.
Where?
I'm gonna read a
Where's
quick.
Barbara?
Ben ran because he loved her, because he was stupid.
Oh, there we go. Okay, all right. So anyway, so for And It Will Be a Beautiful Life, you know, I've got, like I said, my main character is a traveling pipeliner, and I did that work for a while, and I didn't do it so I could turn around and write a book, although I won't lie, I saw the fictional possibilities fairly early in my tenure. But I don't think I could have written the book I wrote without having been in Chelsea, Michigan, and Buffalo, New York, and Iron River, Michigan, and Superior, Wisconsin, and, you know, all the places that I went. You know, and I'm not just talking secondary roads, I'm talking like tertiary, off the map roads, you know, spent hours and hours in places that nobody has ever gone on a vacation, you know,
where the pipelines are.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And usually under the cover of night, so nobody knew I was there. And it, to me, it just sparked all those, you know, I mean, you know the idea brain, right? It's like, oh, that's a good idea. You know, it just sparked every single one of those things.
So let me ask you, sorry to interrupt, but
oh, sure.
I'm very intrigued all of a sudden about the pipeline work at night. What were you doing at night?
Well, okay, so the kind of pipeline inspection, and I'll try not to go too far into the weeds, because then we could do a whole session on, you know, on liquid dynamics. So
no,
the kind of pipeline work that right. The kind of pipeline work that he does is he tracks tools through the line. So the tool is in the line underground, and he is above ground, making sure it keeps moving toward its destination. And so that requires, if you do that kind of job, that requires 24-hour coverage above ground. You might do 300 miles at 3 miles an hour, which is the better part of a week. And so, you know, you work in 2 shifts, you trade off with another guy, and you go gently down the line. So I always preferred the night shift, which was midnight to noon, because I just, that solitude, that quiet was much more appealing to me than being out there when people were moving around. So and when it came time to write the book, it carried that flavor. I imparted that desire to be out at night onto my character. And I find, just in terms of writing, occasionally I've got to shut off and go rejoin the world. And that's place. I mean, that's, refill your cup with people who are in the places where you're going to end up writing one way or another. I think for me, it's indispensable to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have, I don't want to make too much of it, but a lot of part of my writing, like I was saying before with Karen and everything, I don't know where it comes from. And one short story I published a while ago, again, I'm like, okay. It takes place in Lawton, Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
And the main character works in a tire store. And I've never been to Oklahoma. I've never worked in a tire store. But the story worked, you know, and I thought that was, I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting that it turned out that way, because most of the time I have to, go and be in places. But,
I wonder what fired up in your brain that led you to those two things. That's
the story. The story was about this guy who is madly in love with this unattainable woman.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he lives with his great aunt, who's like very old. And I don't know where these things came from, but part of it I know. This sounds kind of funny, but and maybe this could have been the spark of the story. This is going to sound funny, but my whole life I've been fascinated by tires.
Yeah, really.
Because there's rubber trees and like how do they make the tires out of the trees? And there's a texture of the tire, and I don't know. I love tire stores. You go in and the tires are like in pyramid shapes, and
you got that smell, that smell. Vaguely industrial smell. Yeah, yeah.
And they're ubiquitous, and I don't know. So work in a tire store, but it was interesting because I'd never been there, and again, there was something saying, well, this is where this story is, and he ends up, just to get the story finished, he ends up marrying the woman who's completely unattainable to him, but the only reason she marries him is immigration to get permanent residence. So it's like he's driving into Las Vegas. This is okay. Maybe he'll love me eventually.
That's interesting. I found that over the course of 11 books that have mostly been set in Montana, that I've sort of built this world that I imagined in this place that actually exists. Like I will use Missoula or Miles City or Glendive or wherever, but these stories exist in a Missoula or a Glendive or whatever. That's not entirely what you would get if you drove there today. Right. And what's interesting to me that has happened here is it opens up the possibility of that thing about writing you can't explain. I remember I was writing a short story set in the early 80s, and it was about a guy who witches wells, which a lot of old well diggers believe that, forget those geological surveys, get me a guy with a willow branch and he'll tell me where the flow of water is. Oh, cool. So this guy was a well witcher. That's what he did. And so I'm writing this story and I'm thinking it was a short story and I'm thinking, well, it's about this, and then all of a sudden the father character from my second novel walks right onto the page and imposed himself on the story. And I literally did not know he was going to show up until my fingers typed him in there.
Yeah, I love
And
that. That's great.
I love it too, but it's really hard to explain. Like if I go talk to students and I go, you know, you have to leave room for the serendipitous. You have to leave room for the magical, because, you know, this is always my thing. You know, you cannot tightly control everything. I can't. I shouldn't deign to tell anybody else how they can or can't write. But for me, I have to leave a lot of that field wide open, and almost in every case, I can trace it to the decisions that I've made about where and when I've set this story. You know, these things just show up. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the magic. I'm gonna turn on a light here.
Oh, sure.
You know, that's the magic of it. And you know, you think of the books like one book I read, and I'm sure you've read it, that completely changed me. There's a little story behind it. I was 20 years old, 19 years old, living in New York City, and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and these guys just beat the crap out of me. Three
Oh,
guys
wow.
just jumped on, you know, they fractured a couple of ribs. I was all beat up and everything. So I went to St. Vincent's Hospital in the village, and I gave them a different name because I had no money. And when I was walking back from the hospital, there was a guy selling used books on the street, and I picked up On the Road.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
And I took it back to my little hovel and read it, and was just like, it exploded in me. I mean, it was, this has happened to me a couple times, very rare, but I remember finishing the book and setting it down and kind of going, I got to read that again, and just immediately started over. And you know, the places, the journey that he goes on. I mean, you know, you're on the bus with him, and you're in the car with him and Dean, and you're taking those trips with them, and they go down to Mexico, and it's just exhilarating. You know, it's exhilarating. And that was that and Catcher in the Rye, and you know, Holden walking around New York City,
right, with all his grudges and all his
just mesmerizing in terms of where they took place, and clearly, again, going back to the state of mind, because I think the state of mind is so important to the characters. You know, it would be interesting to write something where someone is completely disassociated from where he is, like probably just off the top of my head, maybe a story set in Vegas with all this crazy stuff going around, and it has nothing to do with him. You know, that could be, but yeah, it's those two books were, I think, the beginning for me of really sort of, you know, and I was writing then, but I wasn't writing well, but getting that idea that you can put somebody somewhere, and it's like Trading Places, like the title of the talk. It's like, I'm sitting on a couch with fractured ribs. No, I'm not. I'm driving in a car to Colorado with Sal and Dean. You know.
I think the breakthrough books for me were the Steinbeck California stories, and part of it is, you know, I'm a Westerner, you know, which is so funny. I mean, that's a real thing. My wife is from Long Island, and how in the world we found each other is just, you know, bizarre to me, because she is so Eastern and I am so Western, and it leads to some dynamic tension as opposed to the kind of tension that will tear you apart. But the California stories of Steinbeck, I think that's when I was young and I hadn't started writing fiction, but I think that's when I realized, like, this guy knows these people. He knows these lives. He knows these places. You could feel them and touch them, and you know, and I had started, I mean, my junior year of high school, I had to read A Farewell to Arms for class, and I was kind of cowed by it. But then I really I really responded to the way Hemingway wrote. He had that journalistic style that nobody else at the time was doing. Journalism was kind of what I was aiming toward. But when I found Steinbeck, it was kind of like, okay, yeah, Hemingway was fun, but I couldn't, how do I say this? I responded more to the heart and humanity of Steinbeck than to the machismo and nihilism of Hemingway. And so those California books just ratcheted my head open in a big way.
Well, the thing about Farewell to Arms that really surprised me was how tender he was to the woman he was in love with, calling her all these terms of endearment and darling. And it was like, wow, earnest. I didn't expect that.
Quite at odds with the public image that he later cultivated. So.
Steinbeck. I mean, I grew up a little bit south of San Francisco.
Okay.
And so I love his books too, the Monterey and Carmel and that whole area.
Salinas. Yeah, for sure.
It's beautiful. So what are you working on now?
That's a good question. I don't know how much of the inner workings Liz wants us to reveal, but I owe them a book, and I'm going to give it to them because I have a journalism background and I meet deadlines, but boy, I don't know.
Okay, well,
I think the thing I probably should talk about, because whatever it is that I owe them is 2 years away. I do have a book coming out in May of next year called Dreaming Northward, and it is very much a book of place and displacement. It's probably the most ambitious story I've tried to do in terms of scope. It's one family, but 4 timelines. So it's 1952, 1972, 2002, 2012. And it was a lot of fun to take a given place, but stretch it out over 60 years and then make each of those timelines start imposing their will on the other ones, and have it come out. I said to Lou, our fellow publisher, I told him one time, I said that I've never built a bridge where I'm building it a stanchion at a time and then hoping, that once that stanchion is there and I'm standing out there staring at the water below my feet, that I know where the next stanchion is going to go, and what about you? What do you got coming?
Well, in terms of place, it's pretty, it takes place in Laurel Canyon in LA.
All right.
And it's very LA centered. I mean, I had a lot of really kind of remarkable experiences when I lived down there. So yeah, it's basically in a nutshell. I don't know how much I should say either, but it's a story where basically, it's this character ends up in a relationship with a woman who's 30 years older than he is.
Oh, okay.
And she has 2 children who are older than him, who both come and into, she has a house in Laurel Canyon. She's fairly well off. And they arrive, her daughter and her son, who are older than the guy, surprise the mom, unbeknownst to each other. And so they're all living in that house at the same time. So talking about place, I mean, the house is the place, Laurel Canyon is the place.
The difference in the ages is the place, right? I mean,
the difference in the ages, and what I did last night, which actually may or may not work, there's a whole New York thing that happens many, many, many years later, because I lived in New York for many years, and that, I mean, New York City stories are all over the place. and every New York City story you read, from O. Henry to, I don't know who, Jubal Lahiri, they all have that same, I don't know what you call it, this New York, dynamic. And I love writing about New York. We'll see if that works. I have a deadline too, but I'm way behind.
I
Slow
I
writer.
yeah, I do feel Texas calling to me where I grew up. But it's the Texas of my youth that is calling to me. I was gone for good from Texas in 1991, which, as a solid Gen Xer, I have a lot of feels for the memes that go, no, 1990 was 5 years ago, not 35, or 32. I feel that in my bones,
Yeah.
but I also know that the Texas that I walked away from is not what it is now. I still have parents and siblings there, so I think without some immersive reacquaintance with Texas, I doubt I could write about it as it exists now. But the memories of the 70s and 80s are pretty profound. And I do feel that calling to me. I'm not sure when it's going to come out, but I do think I'm going to pivot from Montana at some point and go write a Texas trilogy or something. I don't know. Maybe not even connected stories, just connected by time and place, but not, characters and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that those early things can be very compelling. And I was sort of like thinking very self-consciously, well, the last book is about, it's Venice and it's New York, and this one's like, Laurel Canyon and New York. And then I said, well, Philip Roth, how many Newark books did he write?
Oh God, yeah, out of 33 or whatever his number was, it was a
Right.
bunch.
Right. I sort of got myself off the hook. Thank you, Philip.
Yeah. Right.
But I'm curious about the Texas stuff because, and I don't want to impute, whatever your politics are,
No.
But Texas seems to me, and I don't know how you feel about this, but it's just from my outsider point of view, it seems like it'd be very hard to write about Texas without infusing politics in some way, because it's so brittle,
Oh, I think whether subtly or as undercurrent or overarching, it's hard to do it without touching it. What I maintain about Texas is that it is this vast, beautiful place full of beautiful people. And then there is the image of Texas that tends to get filtered through somebody's politics or their response to the prevailing politics of Texas. I've always told people Texas isn't a red state, it's a non-voting state. I remember my Texas history teacher in the 7th or 8th grade showing me some of the crazy gerrymandered maps that they had come up with. And so I think at the State House, they've engineered something that doesn't necessarily reflect the populace as it is. It's a bizarre state too, in many ways. Vast parts of that state were not electrified until like 1947, which is history close enough to kiss us,
Yeah.
So
that's surprising to me. I didn't know that.
My high school, here you go. My high school has only been in existence since 1961. And for years and years and years, the mascot was a rebel. We had a Confederate flag at the center of the court, at the basketball court, at the top of the letterhead. It was on my yearbook. It was in my class ring, which I don't know where it is, but I paid extra to get that flag on my ring because I was, an idiot. And and so we told ourselves lies, like, well, it's not about the Confederacy. And it's like, yeah, but there was a mannequin dressed in a gray uniform next to a cannon in front of the school sign for years.
Yeah.
So you can say what you want, but I'm thinking it was kind of about the Confederacy, and it took me moving elsewhere, like moving away from it, to start to reconcile some of what it is and what it's kind of dragged down by. In my estimation, it's just my opinion, but I think I'm right. Here's Texas in a nutshell. My flag football coach when I was 7 years old was a televangelist. And I won't tell you who he was, but I'm just going to say, based on how he treated us kids, that's the least godly man I've ever known in my life. But man, did he rake it in on TV. And, I always knew there was, I've got this celebrity on the sideline screaming at me because I didn't, pluck another kid's flag the right way. I mean, it's just nuts. So that's the stew that is in my head. It's all in there. And I just have to extract it and work it and see where it goes. Yeah.
I think that's great stuff. For some reason, I don't know if this makes a connection that's accurate or not, but when you talked about this when you said they were lying to themselves and trying to, spin it in a particular way, Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, boom, hit me.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You were saying that.
North Bennington, Vermont. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, I haven't read it in quite a while, but it's whatever they thought they were doing, they thought it was right.
Yeah.
And there's, I don't know, it's an intriguing thing. I'd be curious if you did dive into that, because it's fascinating. I mean, one of the things that totally fascinates me, and something I plan to do at some point, is self-deception.
Right.
Because it's a completely counterintuitive thing. How can you deceive yourself? But we all do it all the time. And sometimes with catastrophic results. Like, I mean, I'm in Paris and not so long ago, there were Nazis marching around.
Right.
And a lot of the Parisians, hid. There was the Vichy, thought it was all okay. But if you really opened your eyes, you knew it wasn't okay. But, self-deception on a grand scale, or you could self-deception like, I can buy that car, I mean, there's a whole scope to it.
Yeah. I wish I see, I don't remember the author or the editor who gave him this advice, but there was somebody who in the 30s or 40s who said to his editor, I want to write a story about that encompasses how I feel about the march of Nazism, and the editor suggested that he write something picayune, like, again, I'll get all the examples wrong except the underlying principle of it, which is pick something picayune, like, how's a guy going to make his rent payment when he just doesn't have it? And the editor told him, I guarantee you, if you write that story well, everything that you feel about this big topic you're talking about will come out. And I'm always cognizant of that. I mean, that's one of the things where second and third drafts are really instructive to me, because there's that moment of, oh my goodness, this is what I was thinking about. This is what I, in the narrow aperture of this one person's struggle, gosh, I was thinking about some much larger things, and that, I think that's, again, we talked about the magic earlier. I think that there's a lot of that in there. Yeah. I
mean, one of the sort of themes, I don't know if you can call it a theme, but one of the things that's happening in the Eternal Graffiti novel is there's this pretty much this continuing fear among the two major characters about being drafted.
Okay. Yeah.
And it impacts their lives in pretty significant ways. And so it's like the Vietnam War, like you're saying, is this grand, huge topic. And how does it affect this guy who's about to turn 18?
Right.
And what does he do to avoid it? Because in a particular story, this character was not having any of it.
Right.
And the fear of it. And there's a scene where he's locked up in this kind of juvie prison, and this guy comes in. He's a teacher from UC Berkeley, and he sort of radicalizes them. Like the Pentagon Papers just came out. And he's telling these kids, how many of you are going to turn 18? Is burn your draft cards. It's the first thing you do, blah, blah. And I didn't really, set out to do a Vietnam thing, but yeah, it came out in the terms of these two characters, especially this one character, like, how does this affect him? Because I was a little younger than these characters were, but I was on the cusp
Sure.
of possibly being drafted if that war lasted longer. And it was terrifying.
Yeah.
Because, I grew up watching body counts on TV. Anybody who was, probably 8 or 9 years or older during the 60s, when you watch CBS or NBC or ABC, it's like a score,
Yeah.
319 Viet Cong and 200 Americans. And you see the body bags coming out, it was terrifying.
Oh, we must be winning. Yeah.
Yeah, it was,
Yeah. Right. No, that's, yeah. I love, again, that I think that goes back to the idea of how time and place impose the questions that you have to answer as you work your way through the book. And yeah, that's
like what you said about drafts, because for me, like with Eternal Graffiti, I swear I probably wrote 25 drafts, 30 drafts.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it took a long time. And then again, I just didn't stop, because it's like you said, the ideas kept coming. Oh, wait a minute, I can do this. Oh,
right.
Or take this out because it's nonsense, but it's my favorite part of writing. Like when which may not be that interesting to people listening, but when I write a first draft, it's just a skeleton. It's like, and then I just fill it in and fill it in and fill it in, and it gradually, grows into something worthwhile. But it takes a long time.
My wife, who writes in a completely different area than I do, she's more like that. Like, first draft skeleton, second draft hang some meat off of it,
Right,
and then
right.
I tend to back up in increments and rewrite as I go forward. And so usually at the end of draft 1, it's probably time for me to embark on draft 3, but it's still, that third one is the one where all the discovery happens. I start weeding out the inconsistencies and all of that, and making sure you've really nailed what you want to nail. Yeah,
because one of the things I do, and it could depend on where the story is taking place. Certainly the mindset is, which I never did until the last couple of years, asking myself specifically, how do I raise the stakes? Yeah. Because I wrote this one scene, it's like, okay, and then I thought, oh, wait a minute, I can do this, and crank up the drama, not in any contrived way, but there's got to be a lot at stake for your characters. Otherwise, who wants to read it? And who wants? I mean, for me, if there's not a lot at stake, why am I bothering writing this thing?
Yeah.
And so that always comes in the, like, he walked down the street and slipped on a banana peel, could become, he got hit by a truck.
Right. Yeah. It's the having the love of it, being like in your full empathy, is the propulsive element, I think. Now that love takes on many, many flavors over the course of an entire draft, you know. Somewhere in there, I'm despising the whole thing, but keeping moving forward just to, you know, just because I know there's another shore out there, you know, and I just have to keep sailing toward it. But yeah, the love, you know, I don't know. I guess what I love about writing the most is that it's one of the few things that I don't get better at as I go along. It actually becomes harder to me. You know, each new book is harder to write than the one that was before it. If I practice my golf game the way I should, I'd get much better at golf. But I feel like with writing, you know, it's always like, oh God, this is going to be so hard, you know, and I'm not a big, you know, the glory is in the struggle guy, but I do appreciate the mental challenge of each new one, you know. So
yeah, I mean, I do too. I think for me, I've always written. I've written since I was a really young person.
Yeah.
And I just got this compulsion to do it. And I can't not do it, which is going back to the Salieri thing, which is 20 years ago. But it's just something I have to do. And the good thing about lately is I actually have gotten better at it.
Yeah.
And I guess we're signing off here, right?
We're getting close. Yeah, we're getting close.
I mean, I have gotten better at it, and I have learned to trust myself. I mean, before I was just tearing myself apart all the time. And now I'm like, no, I mean, you know, I've got this book out, you know, and Lou took it and Liz read it, and you know, it's like, oh,
she read it twice. Yeah.
It's a validation, you know, that
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so I feel like, yeah, I can do this. Although this one that I'm working on now, it is harder. It's like,
yeah.
How am I going to do it? You know.
Right. Well, I've really appreciated talking to you again for the second time, Pete, and and I hope we can do it in meet space at some time. You're going to have to come back from Paris, I think, for that to happen. But once you're back, you're only a couple of states away, so we ought to be able to hook that up. So
that's true. It'd be cool.
Yeah.
It'd be great.
Yeah. And thank you, Liz. It was a blast.
Of course, thanks so much for doing this, folks. And thank you everyone that was able to attend. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you million, Liz. Great to meet you. You know.
Yes, you too. All right, bye folks. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, you too. Take care. Bye.